Well, welcome everybody to season 1, episode 16 of Bridging Generations with Howard Snooks. And I am Howard. And today I have a guest who I've known for 30 years, Bill St. John, he's from old school Denver, an old Denver family. And so that's kind of how we made our connection at first, is he's been around for many his family's been around for many generations. And just to remind you all, or those of you who are newly watching this, I call it Bridging Generations because what I do is discuss what it's like to have authentic relationships between generations. Now, Bill and I happen to be almost exactly the same age, so we're the same generation. But he's got some really interesting stories about mentoring and perhaps the opposite of mentoring as we go on. And I think you're going to find his story very fascinating. But I always start with the dad joke. So I just got in a fight with 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11. The odds were against me.
That's great.
I'm glad. I see we're getting off to a good start, Bill. All right. Well, Bill, I'm going to turn the mic over to you just to give it's kind of a brief summary of who you are, where you've been, what you've been up to.
Well, I'm 76 years old, so I've been up to a lot. I was born in Denver. I'm a fourth generation Coloradan. My people came here from the east in the late 1800s, settled north of Denver in the area of Fort Lupton and Brighton. They were dairy farmers to start with, and then my father moved to Denver after he went to dental school in Chicago, met my mother there, and I was born and raised in Denver. I'm the first of 9 kids in my family. Right away, there's a big generational gap in a way between number 1 and number 9. There's a 17 and a half year difference between myself and my youngest sibling.
That's still quite a few kids in 17 years.
Well,
kids like every 2 years.
Yeah, we were Roman Catholic, and in those days, no artificial birth control was allowed. And so I had not celebrated my 6th birthday, and I already had 5 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
So all these kids right away. When we became an actual part of another, we were one family. Then the latter 3 kids were born in more stretch of time, and they became another family in the family. But anyway, I started out with a big generational gap.
The Irish sextuplets.
Well, almost. We call them Irish twins, if they're born in the same 12 months. Anyway, I went away to seminary to be a priest back in 1964. There's a story there, which probably we'll hear about because it has to do with intergenerational relationships. And in those days, a young boy could go away to the seminary at the age of 14, which is what I did. I was there until the age of 19 when they kicked me out of the seminary. They thought I was not good priestly material.
Wow.
I heard the word rambunctious for the first time in my life.
Rambunctious?
Rambunctious.
Wow.
Anyway, I finished my schooling in in New York and Denver, graduated. I'm very proud. I graduated first in my class.
From which school?
Regis University, what's called Regis College at the time. I quickly married a woman that I had met in college from Cleveland, Ohio. And we started out our family in Denver. And I was in the wine trade at the time, working for Applejack Liquors. I was running their wine department. And from that, I went to graduate school in Chicago at the University of Chicago, where I got my degrees, my graduate degrees. Penny went with me. We lived there for 6 years while I got a couple masters and a PhD. I'm an overachiever, as you can tell already. Moved back here to Denver and began teaching at Regis University.
What was your PhD in?
My PhD is in theology, specializing in theological ethics. I was really interested in moral theology at the time. I was going to study medical ethics, legal ethics, business ethics, and that was what I wanted to teach about, and I did at Regis. While I was at Regis, I started writing for the Rocky Mountain News, a paper which has gone out of business just shy of its 150th birthday. And I started writing about wine And one thing led to another, and I left academia and began to be a full-time newspaperman. And I wrote as a journalist for 40 years from that period of time until now for the Rocky Mountain News, as a journalist for Microsoft, actually on a website they had called sidewalk.com.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Which was a sort of city guide. And I wrote a lot about restaurants, reviews, and about wine for them. And then I moved to the Denver Post and became the food editor there. I was while I was at the Denver Post, I left Denver for a return to Chicago, not for graduate studies again, but this time to work in the wine trade. I ran a wine school there, as I did here in Denver. I kind of took the school with me and taught people about wine in Chicago, worked in the retail trade there, and then started working for the Chicago Tribune as a journalist and for the University of Chicago continuing education arm called the Graham School, and started teaching a great deal about the history of cuisine and history of foods, different food items, and their individual history and about wine. I moved back to Denver in 2016, wanted to come back to my hometown, and I worked again for the Denver Post. I left the Denver Post in 2022 and have been on my own now, pretty much semi-retired since then. I write for the University of Colorado Health Organization, and for myself, I have a website. And
Cooking with Bill, right?
It's called Get Cooking with
Get
Bill.
Cooking with Bill.
Cooking with
Right.
Bill St. John.
Right.
There's a play on words, actually. Get cooking means I want to help you get cooking, like to know about cooking. Do you get it? And then also I want to exhort you to get cooking, because I think cooking for yourself and your family and your friends is really important. So I try to encourage that as well. Apropos of that, it's interesting. I go out on Monday evenings with two other people, and we ourselves are three generations of people. Pat is in her 90s. I'm in my 70s, and John is in his 50s. And we talk about the fact that we have these three generations to talk about the food that we're eating. She writes it up as kind of a restaurant promotion or a restaurant review every Monday after we go out to a different restaurant. But that's a very intergenerational relationship that we have as professional foodies. And so that's a little bit about me, about my history, and a lot of the jobs and so forth that I've done.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Well, that's an impressive trajectory. And tell me, what's the link between your interest in wine and fine food and theology? Is there any connection?
Well, that's interesting. I once called the table the great altar of life, because this is where we learn a lot about things that are more above, if that's the right word, or transcend the everyday cooking and food. We learn about the transcendental qualities of sharing, caring for, being with other people over the table, the beauty of life, the aesthetic aspects of living well, living nobly, living richly. So I think that those are things. I learned a great deal of that from my mother, who was a self-taught cook. She came to this country not knowing at all about any kind of cooking. And
she was from Belgium.
She was from Belgium,
right.
Exactly.
Right.
And she taught herself a great deal, went to cooking schools in Europe and this country. And she taught us a lot about the importance of sitting down at the table. There were, at the height of our family numbers, there were 11 of us at the table. And a Great Dane underneath.
That's a lot of cooking.
That's a lot of cooking to do. I used to call my mother's oven Noah's Ark, because everything went in pairs. 2 peach pies, 2 turkeys, two ham casseroles. You know what I mean? So,
well, my grandmother, my mother's mother, was one of 11 children.
Oh,
and it's a similar sort of scene. But her grandmother lived with them. They called her Grahenny. Her name was Grandma Henley. But
Grahenny.
But her job was to manage the bread baking every morning. So she would make 20 loaves of bread a day, for this huge family. And then she would take care of the older children while my grandmother's mother would take care of the newest babies.
We went through massive quantities of food, as you can imagine. My mother used to buy 30 loaves of bread each month at this little baker on 6th Avenue in Denver. And I remember her making sandwiches in a big line, kind of an assembly line for us before school,
Right. Huh.
So,
well, your mother, as I recall, she had a cookbook that was kind of an iconic cookbook
That's
in
right.
Denver.
Actually,
it seemed like everyone in Denver had this cookbook.
Yeah, it was called Friends for Dinner. I cautioned her against the name because it sounded like cannibalism.
Or Quakers.
But it was a wonderful book. She, there's a lovely story behind that book, actually. My sister Annie, number 8, came out as a lesbian to my parents, as gay to my parents. And this was really difficult for especially my mother to deal with. My mother was pretty conservative, Roman Catholic, European. But one year my mother went to San Francisco to visit my sister Annie at the time. Here's a generational relationship in a way. And noticed in Annie's kitchen a book for Project Angel Heart as a way of cooking for people who were at that time going through the AIDS crisis, and cooking for them and to help nourish them as they went through their HIV or AIDS. And it was a benefit for their Project Angel Heart. And without saying anything to Annie or anyone else in the family, my mother came home to Denver and decided to start a cookbook to help raise money for Volunteers of America who had their Meals on Wheels for People with AIDS program. She wanted to donate the proceeds of the publication of this cookbook and the sales of this cookbook to this organization. And she went around to all the chefs that she knew, mostly through me, because at that time I was a restaurant critic and I had a lot of chef connections in the state of Colorado. And she went to these chefs and asked each of them to devise a menu for if they had 8 friends over for dinner, what menu would they offer them with the recipes? And so all these chefs put together these different menus. I matched wines with them and edited the book with her, did a lot of writing for her. But my mother put this whole thing together, tested all the recipes, and put this book together called Friends for Dinner. And it went through 3 publications, 3 printings. She raised, I think, over $100,000 in 1989 monies for the Volunteers of America for Meals on Wheels for People with AIDS, just with this cookbook alone. And she never, she never promoted herself or any cause. She just did this cookbook for that reason, which I think was her way of dealing with her daughter's gayness. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that I'm sort of moved by this story. It sounds like, because you said it was difficult for her to accept the fact that her daughter was gay.
Right.
And she sublimated that, I would say, would be the term that you would use, and turned it into a wonderful service.
Right.
That's very impressive.
It was really impressive. By that time, one of my brothers also came out as gay, and I myself came out as gay.
The same time.
Around the same time as the publication of this book. And so it was very difficult for my mother to handle this thing, but I think in a way she handled her children's gayness. She always called us the gays or a gay. She never called she never used it as an adjective. She always used it as a noun. And so she had 3 gays as children. And I think this was one way of her dealing with some of this, sublimating is to use your word. But it was really a wonderful gift to the community and also to us.
You told me a story once, and I had this image of her sitting at a card table selling the cookbooks outside of the library or something.
Every Saturday she went down to the Tattered Cover. And she set up a card table. She had rolled chocolate truffles that she would have made during the week and brought them with her. And if you bought a book, you got a chocolate truffle.
Wow.
So she made hundreds of these chocolate truffles and gave them the recipe for which is in the book. But my mother flogged this book for a couple of years through 3 printings. It was quite an impressive feat on her part.
She was very well known for it.
She was really known for that,
And your dad was kind of known for being the dentist to the old Denver families. That was kind of his.
He was a dentist for just shy of 50 years.
Yeah.
And a wonderful dentist. I mean, he had great skill as a dentist. There were dentists around town that would, he was a children's dentist. First of all, he took kids only until they were about 18 years old, and then transferred them to general dentists. And there were some of these general dentists who told me stories how they would look in this new patient's mouth and say, "Oh, St. John's been here." So
he had his own
he had his own
distinctive style. Wow.
Great skilled carving teeth, and
Wow.
and he was known for his gentleness, his kindness. His nickname was Feather Fingers.
Wow.
He was really soft spoken and very kind. Being a children's dentist is very, very difficult, stressful work because the kids are frightened by the dentist, and they're afraid of the incipient pain that they're going to get. But my father was able to handle thousands of children over the years that he was a dentist. Wow. With great care and kindness, and he became known for his kindness and his gentleness.
Well, you're known for your kindness as well, I would say. And you've kind of described your mother in terms of how she is a mentor to you. Mm. And tell me a little bit more about your father. And was it a strict, I want to be just like my dad, or was it?
I didn't want to be like my dad at first. As I say, I was the first of the 9 children born. Mm-hmm. He was extraordinarily strict with me.
It's surprising, given his gentleness.
That was learned behavior on his part that came with time. I noticed that the way he treated discipline with his children evolved over time. With me, he was very strict, very curt. It's kind of a terrible story. I sucked my thumb and wet my bed. And to cure me of these things, he whipped me every morning for the whole year of my 11th year before my 12th birthday. He wanted to have me stop these behaviors. So I would just get out of bed that I had most probably wet, pulled my thumb out of my mouth, and I walked down to his bathroom because he was always, shaving when I woke up, bathing, and I would pull my pajama bottoms down and lean over the bathtub, and he would take out his belt and he would whip me. And he just figured that would be one way of curing me of my bad behaviors. That's how I remember it.
Yeah.
But he was really, really strict with me, very demanding. I never did anything right. Well, I did some things right, of course, but I never mowed the lawn correctly. There were always clippings on the sidewalk that I hadn't swept up. And so, but he was kind in the sense that he taught me a lot of things around the dinner table, and the other kids who were there, there were always kids there because, as I said, there were so many birds. But I noticed that the way he behaved in disciplinary ways with kids, successive children that he had, my brothers and sisters, changed. So that with the last one, number 9, he was very gentle, very understanding, didn't pamper my youngest sib, but he was very kind, and that kindness also mirrored itself in his practice with these kids, his patients. Known for his kindness. We couldn't go anywhere in the city of Denver, the grocery store, the gas station, church, without some mother or father of one of his patients coming up to him, Dr. St. John, so nice to see you. They just exuded this, like, I want to touch the hem of his garment. Because of his kindness.
But I'm kind of picturing what that must be like for you to know that your father beat you every morning.
It was really hard for me to,
and everyone else loved him. And
it was. But that was over too, also in my life, because it was a temporal thing.
He became gentler with you over time,
and then over time, very understanding, very kind, quiet.
What was it like to come out to him?
Well, it was really interesting. I planned coming out to my family. On Thursday, I was going to tell my siblings. On Friday, I was going to tell my parents. And then on Saturday, I was going to tell our son. We had Penny, and my wife and I had a son at the time. His name is Colin, and he was 13 years old. And we were going to tell him on Saturday. I told a couple of my brothers and sisters on Thursday. Of course, they already knew that I was out or gay. Mm-hmm. And so they said, what's the news? You're a reporter for a newspaper. What's the news? And then on Friday, I asked my parents to come over to our house. My mother did not want to come over because I think she knew what the news was going to be. And I told my father that I was gay and that I was leaving the family. I had planned to leave my family after we dropped the bomb on Colin on Saturday because I didn't want to tell him I was gay and that I was going to leave the family and stick around. And I told my father this on Friday, and my father, very surprisingly, leaned over and he said to me, "Billy, we know you're homosexual. We just figured that you and Penny had figured out some kind of arrangement."
Wow.
He knew I was gay
Wow.
before I told him, but never said anything to me about it. Never offered to share anything about it with me. Didn't express my mother's anguish about it to me or anything like that. When we told Colin, of course, on Saturday, that was a different experience. He was shocked, and it was really, really difficult news for him. But my father handled my being gay afterwards with great aplomb. He didn't guilt trip me in any way or transfer any of my mother's anger or guilt to me. So that was pretty cool.
Do you think your mother or father thought, how we raised 9 children, 3 of them are gay, what did we do? Like, did we cause this sort of condition?
Yeah, we never talked about that. He and my mother never talked about that with any of the other gay kids in the family either that I know of from talking with them.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't any kind of cause and effect to talk.
Yeah.
But I now, and for most of my maturity, I've really wanted to be like my father. He not just became a mentor for me, but I mean, I want to emulate his kindness, his way of being with people. So I try to do that well. And so that's been a shift. You know, I think Penny and I also, very interestingly, raised Colin in a very different way than I was raised by my parents. So that intergenerational relationship was affected by the intergenerational relationship I had with my parents that I grew to understand in my father's evolution, especially in terms of how we treated Colin when we were raising him.
So how was it different?
Well, we didn't discipline him in the same way, for example. We allowed him to be who he was. One of our great phrases growing up was use your words. Say whatever you have to say. Mm-hmm. We may not agree with it, but we want you to express yourself. So we allowed him to try to be who he was and didn't try to pigeonhole him or constrain him in too many ways. We disciplined him, of course, and he had lots of timeouts and refusals of privileges, just like any kid would. But Colin and I were just talking about this just the other day. He's now 43 years old, but he doesn't remember me beating him or hitting him. Or I think I spanked him one time. I remember feeling very badly about doing that. But
well, I don't know what it was about these 50s dads, but my dad also used the belt on me sometimes for totally like I was too good of a kid, really, I think. But I remember one time I was protesting. I played the euphonium in band in high school. Okay. This was junior high, I think, or I don't know, probably 7th grade, something. And I was protesting, practicing, and he got out his belt and started beating me with his belt because I was protesting. And I, resented that terribly. And he also was very well, everyone loved my dad. They thought he was the greatest guy, but he's huge. He was a huge man. It was sort of frightening to be a little kid and have a dad that big. But he also changed so much over time and became a very gentle, kind man in his maturity. But I remember one time I swatted my son Joe, who's the same age as Colin. And it was at a McDonald's, and he was squawking about something, and he still had his diaper on. And I just sort of swatted him like this. I said, "I've had it with you, Joe." And it was like I had committed, I strangled him or something in the middle of McDonald's. He was just shocked that it happened. And he still tells me he remembers that whole scene but that was the only time I ever swatted either of my kids. I decided, I just think that sort of punishment just doesn't go. And I asked my dad if he had been physically, he said, "No, I never got a spanking in my life."
Huh.
So I thought that was strange, but it's sort of 50. There's something about the 50s.
Yeah, I don't know what my dad's situation was. I don't know if he had the switch taken to him. I don't remember talking with him about that. So, I think that it's interesting. Like, let's say my relationship now with my youngest sibling, he's 17 and a half years younger than I, but the years don't seem so distant at this age
Right.
as they did at earlier period
Sure.
of time. I think it very much matters that your perspective as who was the looker and where you're looking,
Mhm.
what you're looking at. So
Mhm. So your dad ended up being a mentor, and also like, I'm not going to do this, but I'm going to be how he is. And you did it at a younger age. You didn't take decades to turn into this kind, gentle person.
no, because I just saw the benefit of
Yeah.
being the way he was. I saw the social approval that he received as well. I mean, people didn't come up to my father because he took a belt out at him. They came up.
Exactly.
They came up to my father to be with him.
Yeah.
In his presence because he had been kind to them,
Right.
or through their children.
Yeah. Same with my dad. The people that liked my dad, it was because he was witty and funny and nice.
My dad
that
was
sort of
witty
thing.
and funny too.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll leave your parents for now, and we'll go on into other mentors. And I'm, 14, you leave Denver.
I left Denver,
You go to
Virginia, via
and
Chicago and Washington on a train. I had my own little compartment. It was a really cool
Wow.
experience.
But man, that's quite a.
That for a 14-year-old, that was a huge step.
And you'd already decided you're going to be a priest at age 14.
I wanted to be a priest. Yeah.
How did you get there?
Well, we had a family friend who would come around. He was one of the priests in the order in which I was entering. They were called the Missionary Servants of the Most Holy Trinity. That's their very long name, nicknamed the Trinitarians sometimes.
Oh, I've heard of the Trinitarian.
And there are two orders of Trinitarians. I think these are the black-robed ones. But nonetheless, they were headquartered in Maryland, and they had a seminary in the Blue Ridge of Virginia. I went there in August of 1964 to start my studies in high school and start my studies as to be a priest.
And your parents were all for this.
Well, my father told me later, after I had left the seminary, or had been left,
Right.
that he really, it was kind of man of him to say this to me. They didn't approve of my leaving at that young age. They didn't want me to go away that far at that young age, but they allowed me to make that decision and supported me in that decision.
Did they have to pay for this?
Boy, I think so. I think there was tuition that they were charged. They were also benefactors of the order, which is how he knew this priest that would come around every 6 or 7 months to our home. And that's how he got the idea of going to this order rather than, say, the Jesuits or some other order, or to the diocesan priesthood in my city of Denver. So Father Andrew was his name, and he would come around and collect funds, speaking to groups of people that were devout Catholics that wanted to help support this order.
Wow.
They received a lot of money from people just wanting to support the order.
Wow.
So, I mean, now this is kind of a terrible story about intergenerational relationships.
Well, I'm ready to hear it.
Okay. I went there, as I say, in August 1964. My very, very first day there, just shy of 9 hours having shown up in the middle of the night. I'm a swimmer. Our family had a swimming pool in our backyard for the latter years of my childhood. And we were on the swim team for the Valley Country Club. All of us were swimmers. So I was swimming in this big, beautiful Olympic pool where later on I was part of our swim team as the seminarians and was a champion swimmer. Actually, I was a great swimmer. I was in the shallow end, and this priest came up to me and pulled my bathing suit towards him and stuck his hand down into my, and started playing with my genitals.
Wow.
And talking to me at the same time about my trip. Where'd you come from? How did you get here? What's your name? But he assaulted me.
And no one knew, like, he was doing it underwater.
Because he was doing it underwater.
Yeah.
The water line was at my waist, my belly button. And I don't know what verb you want to use. Assaulted, molested, attacked, fondled, whatever verb works. For, I don't know how long it was. Of course, it seems like an eternity, but he was just twiddling my little dick.
Mm-hmm.
Talking to me about the stuff. And I remember as if it were a strange thing. I mean, like there was a ticker tape in my head, and I was going, this has never happened before, but it must be okay. He's a priest. And I didn't push him away. I didn't react in any negative way, like I was shocked, but I didn't. I was enthralled with the priesthood, and this was a priest, and he was doing this to me. I didn't think it was okay, but I didn't know why. And I didn't have any.
He's a priest.
He's a priest. It's okay.
You're the new student. This is what happens.
Yeah. Anyway, it was the first of many fondlings that occurred in the subsequent 5 years I was there, from him, and other kinds of what we would call sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. And it ended 5 years later, almost to the day, when he took me to the train station for me to return to Denver, because I had been just kicked out of the seminary, and he was drunk, but drove me to the small train station in Monroe, Virginia, where the seminary was located. Actually, I think it was in Amherst, Virginia, but the little town next to Monroe. And he sidled up next to me on this kind of pew-like thing that the train stations used to have, these big wooden kind of pews almost, for chairs, for waiting in waiting rooms. He crunched up next to me, and then he put his hand down in my pants again and started fondling my testicles, which sort of reminded me of Captain Queeg's handling of the balls in that movie, which I forget the title of. And he leaned over to me and said, "Do you want to go to confession, which is a sacrament in the church?" Right. And I pulled his hand away from me, and I said no. That was the first time in 5 years
you've been able to.
I was able to say no, and pushed his hand away. And the train came just at that moment, and I was free of that. For that, I was free of that. Wow. So I went back to Denver. I didn't tell my parents anything about this. It later came out after a suicide attempt on my part when I was in hospital here in Denver at Bethesda. I don't know if it was called a sanitarium or whatever at that time, but then I started dealing with it in my life. And
what led to your? Can you explain when it hit you and you made the suicide attempt? Because it was clearly based on this.
Well, it wasn't part of the suicide attempt. I mean, I just felt badly about myself. I didn't want to live, and I was going to hang myself, and I was caught by a cleaning lady at the restaurant where I was at 1:00 in the morning. The police took me right to the sanitarium, the mental hospital, and put me in. But a point I want to make is, apropos of this podcast, is I was 14 at the time this first happened. He was 28.
Wow.
That's only 14 years difference.
Right.
But the intergenerational thing to me was very real because he was much, much older than I was at that time. I mean, he was like my father, like he was so old, even though he wasn't.
Right.
So, but from my perspective, he was very old.
And revered.
From his perspective towards me, I don't know if there was this generational thing, like he must have looked at me as a prize more than anything else.
A prize. Yeah. Do you think you were the first one?
Well, I don't think that I was the first one, but I don't know of any others. And neither do the people that I have talked about with this part of the order. So, but statistically speaking, unlikely.
Why did you get kicked out of the
seminary? Yeah, now this again is something I really don't know for sure. They said I was anti-authoritarian and rambunctious, and that I wasn't fit material to be a priest. They told me, you don't have a vocation. That's the language, which meant that they told me that I did not have my feelings about what I wanted to do with my life. In theological terms, they were telling me that God had not chosen me to be a priest.
Right. A full-throated rejection to the soul.
Yeah. I do believe, actually, thinking about it, and I have never been able to corroborate this by talking to any of the other people that were part of this order, who eventually, some of them were my class or class beyond me that became priests in this order, that the real reason I was asked to leave was so that they could get rid of me as a problem.
See, that just smells like it.
Yeah, it just smells like it. They knew what was going on. Yeah. They knew about the sexual abuse on his part, and maybe other priests who were doing the same thing with other boys. Right. And they just I was easier to get rid of than he was. Right. He was more necessary to the functioning of the organization than I was. And so they, under a pretext of me not being fit material, asked me to leave. So I
Because
left.
you were captain of the swim team. I presume you
Well,
got decent grades.
I had great. I was manager of the swim team and the soccer team. That was like our class picture. There's only 13 of us in our senior class. Has 6 soccer players and 6 swimmers, and me with my manager's clipboard in the middle.
Wow.
Yeah, I did well. I got great grades, and I was very popular, and I, had a great education and a lot of
stinks to high heaven.
It stinks to high heaven. So I was kind of crushed that they asked me to leave. I wanted to be a priest.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a priest for years, even after that.
Wow.
But anyway, I have a friend who's a very kind friend who said, "You are a priest. When you're in your writings, you kind of send messages that are of moral import. You care for people. You stand up for people. You're with people when they're in trouble and hurting." So,
well, you have a beautiful writing style, and it's very clear. It's the images that you produce. And I know that your eulogy for your father, for example, was something that's been talked about for many, many years about how wonderful it was. So something is retained that has a spiritual component. And I don't know what your religious beliefs are now, but there's something, what would be the word? Numinous, I think would be the term.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I don't have very strong religious beliefs. If you talk about organized religion and that sort of business, I really turned my back on the Roman Catholic Church as an institution. But many of the values that it represents, I carried with me in terms of caring for people, being present to people, being part of a community. But I have I think, a very rich spiritual life. So the word I use is not religious, but spiritual. And spirituality to me is the connection that I have with all things and other people, especially. It's I call it, the spirituality is the in-between. It's an untangible kind of thing. It's not material, but it's what connects us. It's in between us as terminal points of that. So like the old telephone thing when my father took 2 tin cans, and made a string between them, and talked to my brothers and sisters that way. Right. The most important thing wasn't the 2 of us. It was what was in between us. And for me, spirituality is that. It's that connection with other things, the meaningful connection where I receive interesting signals and feelings and power, empowerment, and the bonds that I have with things, people, the environment, cosmos, universe. Really powerful for me.
Wow. So I want to ask you about Penny and Colin here for a minute.
Please.
What's like, you decided you're going to leave the family. I don't know what all that means. When you leave the family, it means moving out, but I don't know what else that meant. But where are things with you and Penny and you and Colin?
Well, it's kind of interesting. It was difficult for me to leave the family, to physically move to another location and live apart from them. Colin didn't speak to me for quite a while after we bombed him with this message.
He was astonished and also ashamed, would you say?
I think he wrote about this for Psychology Today. He was a writer himself, and he wrote a double truck, what we call it, a 2-pager, that crosses the magazine. And he wrote about his own coming out. He had to come out with his feelings about me being gay. He had to grow into them so that he wasn't homophobic or angry. But I allowed Colin to have his feelings about me coming out and leaving the family, which were feelings of anger and perhaps shame. I don't know. I've never really spoken to him about that. But just like any kid would do things to act out their feelings, like smoke weed or dye their hair or shave their hair or whatever, Colin had this way of dealing with me. And I allowed that. I just simply did. I simply still showed up to take him to school. I still showed up a lot of Sundays to cook dinner for Penny and Colin. I still was part of his life. I still loved him and loved her and was, part of that family. And we raised him that way. We continued to raise him that way. And I think that was, well, by then he was getting to be a grown, late teenager and a young adult. But
where did he go to university?
The Congo?
Yeah.
Colin went to Boston College.
Right.
In Boston.
A Catholic
Jesuit school. Penny worked for 46 years for the Jesuits at Regis. It's interesting now, I've moved back in with Penny to her home. She has Parkinson's.
That is very interesting.
And I want to be there for her. My mother died of complications of Parkinson's disease, and I've had a brother die of complications from Parkinson's disease. And so I know what's coming. She's been diagnosed, I think, 3.5 or 4 years with Parkinson's. It's hard to pinpoint when something starts, but the doctor's going to work the calendar back.
Yeah.
So she's got years ahead of her if she goes the typical route, but things are going to fail, and I want to be there to help her. I have helped her a lot already with so many little things, and her dog and the household and her medications and trips that I need to take with her to take her places. So I sort of reinstituted the family, if you look at it in a certain way.
Reconstituted
the family,
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
By moving back in and living with her.
Now, did you divorce Penny?
We are divorced. Colin asked us not to divorce when this thing came down in the late 1990s. And we didn't. We divorced, I think, finally in 2001 or 2002. That was mostly paperwork. I had long lived away from them.
Yeah, that was 24 years ago.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So
almost a quarter century.
Almost a quarter of a century ago. A generation ago.
Wow. Huh. Like, I'm trying to form a question because I have a question inside. I'm trying to
get it out.
But so the divorce changed things. You no longer had a sexual relationship, I presume, with Penny, but something stayed. Something remained. What is it?
It's interesting. Colin once remarked when we were separated and I was living on my own, but still being part of their lives, that, and he did, I think he seconded this sentiment when I moved back in with her just a year ago. Mm-hmm. This would be June of 2025. That he said, Dad, you and Mom are more married now than you were before.
What an interesting observation.
Very interesting observation.
What did he mean by that, do you think?
I think in his eyes, from his perspective, he looked at us now as a couple again, sharing things on an equal basis and being there for each other. A
lot of people in their 70s probably don't have much sex.
Well, let's drop the sex thing for a while. That's very muddied waters if you want to use a colloquialism and a euphemism for the current situation. But I've always loved her as she's a big person in my life. We've always been in love with each other.
She's a lovely person.
She is a lovely person. And you know her as that. And she is to many people. She's very much like my father, very kind, very gentle, very interested in you as a person. And, but so that's you look at the marriage, the typical marriage vows. Is this until death do us part? Are we together in sickness or health or what? I'm together with her because I want to be there for her at this stage in her life, because I can be helpful to her because I know about Parkinson's. Mm-hmm. I just simply want to be there to be with her.
Mm-hmm. And she's welcomed you back.
She has welcomed me back.
That's another interesting part. She didn't say, to hell with you.
Oh, she could have, yeah.
And she never did do that.
She was angry at first at the divorce,
Yeah.
It was a kind of a terrible divorce. And if you look at it in certain ways, there was a terrible combination, a perfect storm of she had a good lawyer and she was angry. I had no lawyer and I was very guilty. That's a bad combination,
Yeah.
And I'm not operating out of guilt here. I came back to her because I wanted to do this for her. Mm-hmm. And she's welcomed me back and she's glad I'm there. She's mentioned to me many times in the last year, I'm happy you're here, or thank you for doing what you're doing. It's nice to see you here, that kind of stuff. So,
Well, I even have a feeling like when you come over to make Sunday dinner, yes, she's glad you did it for Colin's sake, but I bet that she was happy that you were there.
Probably, yeah. Well, I was always wanted to be with her and with Colin and support them in their lives the way a husband would or a father would.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we have to close here in a few minutes, but is there another mentor that you could mention in your life? Someone who is, from a different generation that helped lead you? Your trajectory is such an interesting one, I think. And like, how did you get into journalism from being a professor of theology?
Yeah. Well, I didn't have many mentors in the wine world. I didn't have any journalism mentors in journalism. I became a writer because I wanted to write about wine and then food and then restaurants and then all these other things. I've written tons of book reviews and travel stories and personal profiles, and I've done a lot of recipe writing and food editing and so forth. So I've done a lot. I was even an editorial writer for a while at the Rocky Mountain News. They wanted a kind of more liberal voice for their center right.
Right. The Rocky Mountain News was the center right, and Denver Post was a liberal newspaper.
So if I had to say that an older person who's meant a lot to me and helped me with my life, it would be the late Dana Crawford.
Interesting.
She was my landlady twice over, and then also helped me develop one of my homes for a third turn at taking care of me for living spaces. But Dana was the person I moved from Penny's and Collins as a family to her home in Curtis Park at the time in Denver.
And you should explain who Dana Crawford is.
Dana Crawford, she's
famous Denver,
very
icon
of Denver, a preservationist and a developer, but a wonderful woman, and in a way, a second mother to me. She just died a year ago, February.
She was in her 90s.
She was 93, I believe.
Yeah,
but she took care of me. Helped me with my life. She gave me a place to stay. I paid her rent for it, but she covered me with her kindness physically and also, and we did a lot of things together. We entertained at many dinner parties. She loved dinner parties. She loved my cooking. She loved having me help her with these gatherings. She was very interested in having people around her and encouraging conversation. So I learned a lot from her about what it means to be part of a community, to be part of other people's lives and to help them with their lives.
Wow.
To be kind to them and give them structures and things that help them with their lives. So that's something that was a mentoring aspect of it.
I thought you might mention Dana Crawford. Because I wasn't sure who you would come up with, but I thought she's a candidate for sure. Okay, so last question.
Sure.
Who do you think thinks of you as a mentor?
Wow. That's a good question. Whew. I have a feeling that my son thinks of me as a mentor. As a good example. I think he's proud of me, proud of what I've become and done, proud of my relationship with his mother. I know that I had many, many students over the years, both at Regis University and also in my wine schools. Just a year ago, my group of people that I helped teach wine to in Chicago, they established, when I left Chicago in 2016, they started a group called the DSJs, the Disciples of St. John.
So I think that they would call you a mentor.
and they continue to teach themselves about wine on a monthly basis. They had a 10th annual reunion of their group. No, not a reunion because they unite every month, but they called, and someone let me know about it. So I showed up as a surprise.
Wow.
It was really, really heartwarming to be there. Those people I have mentored in their appreciation of wine and a fine life. So those would be some people. And then some of my students from the University of Chicago and Regis have talked to me about the impact that I've had on their life, which I think has been an important thing. So,
yeah, those are some great examples. And I think I would call these mentors too, people who read your writing and admire you.
Well,
and appreciate and get something out of it. I'd say there's a large contingent of people.
There's a lot of people who very, even to this day, yesterday or Wednesday, I sent out a newsletter every Wednesday. I got a lot of comments on my posting that day, but I get a lot of this like, you've helped me with things. You've helped me with my life. Thank you for giving me. Oh, how interesting. I really didn't know that. So I have mentored people in my writing over the years.
Well, one of the things I've learned in my years as a therapist and just observing is people can say a little thing and it can change things a lot just because they're ready to hear it or something.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be an extended period of time where you can make an impact on someone's life.
Well, I was at a meeting of some friends of mine. Once I heard from a young man, change your perspective, change your life.
Right.
And that has meant a lot to me. And he's mentored me even though
Right.
he's much younger than I am.
Yeah, I'm glad we brought that up. That it doesn't have to be the older one mentoring the
no,
younger one.
exactly.
I've learned a lot from my younger colleagues and friends as well. Hey, Bill, thank you so much. I thought this was a wonderful.
Cool. I'm glad it was.
Yeah.
I'm glad for me, it was a great experience too. Thank you, Howard.
And isn't it amazing how quickly the time goes?
I don't even know how much time it was.
It's 50 minutes.
No way.
Yes.
That's pretty good. You therapists are always about 50 minutes, aren't you?
That's the therapeutic hour, right?
Therapeutic hour, yeah.
Okay, thanks again, Bill.
Great. Thanks, Hal.